You've spent 70 years building a life, gathering memories, facing tragedies, winning small victories no one ever applauded. And now, here you are, older, wiser, and yet perhaps more exposed than ever. Let me tell you something that's going to sting a little. Most people don't want your truth, they want your compliance. They don't want to hear the depth of your suffering or the grandeur of your insight. They want you to stay predictable, quiet, and small. And that's precisely why, after 70, you must become more selective than ever about what you share, because peace is expensive and the cost is your privacy. Let me ask you, have you ever opened your heart to someone only to feel it thrown back at you later in judgment? Have you ever revealed something raw, something sacred, and watched it weaponized or dismissed? Of course you have. We all have. But as you age, the consequences become heavier. Emotional wounds cut deeper. The room for recovery narrows. Time is no longer a vast ocean, it's a narrowing path. So you must guard what matters. When you're young, the world fools you into thinking that vulnerability equals connection. And to a point, that's true. But the truth is more nuanced. Vulnerability must be earned. Not everyone has the character to hold your truth gently, especially when you're older. There's this myth floating around that once you hit a certain age, you owe people transparency. That somehow, because you've lived long, you're supposed to become an open book. I say nonsense. You owe them nothing. Not your secrets, not your regrets, not your history. Especially not if revealing it costs you your well-being. I remember an elderly gentleman I worked with in clinical practice. Let's call him Robert. Robert was 74 when he came to see me. He'd recently lost his wife. They had been married for nearly 50 years. You'd think the grief was the thing crushing him. But it wasn't. What was eating him alive was the loneliness that followed the well-meaning people in his life convincing him to open up. They told him he'd feel better if he talked, so he did. He shared stories about his wife, about his regrets, about how he sometimes woke up thinking she was still beside him. And do you know what happened? Some of them listened, but most they started avoiding him, said he was too heavy. One even told him he was being dramatic. He came to me not because of his grief, but because he felt ashamed for expressing it. There's a lesson there you must discern. Just because someone asks doesn't mean they deserve to know. Just because you feel doesn't mean you have to express. Sometimes silence is the only thing that preserves your dignity. After 70, the world begins to shrink. Friends pass away. Family becomes busier. The circle tightens. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself handing pieces of your soul to people who have no idea how to carry them. That's why I want to walk you through 6 things deep, intimate, sometimes painful truths that you must never share freely. Not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting something sacred, your peace, your privacy, and your well-being. First, do not share your financial situation. Whether you have much or little, it makes you a target. The moment people know what you own, it changes the way they interact with you. Greed is insidious. It hides in the faces of people who call you family. I've seen it ruin relationships, poison inheritances, and fracture trust. Keep your affairs private. Consult professionals, not opportunists. Second, never overshare your medical history with casual acquaintances. You may think it's harmless, just another story about another surgery or another appointment. But here's the truth. Some people begin to see you not as a whole person, but as a collection of failing parts. You become the one with cancer or the one who takes the pills. Your dignity deserves better. Share with your doctors, with trusted loved ones, yes, but not with every ear that inquires out of morbid curiosity. Third, do not reveal the full extent of your regrets. Everyone has the mistakes, missed chances, relationships that ended in bitterness. But when you lay them bare without caution, it allows others to define you by your failures rather than your resilience. And worse, some people feed off the moral superiority of hearing about another's shame. Regret is a sacred fire. It must be carried with meaning, not spilled carelessly in pursuit of sympathy. Fourth, and this is a hard one, do not speak too openly about your fears, especially existential fears. About death, about loneliness, about meaninglessness. It is not because these fears are shameful, they're universal, but because if you speak them in the wrong company, they'll be minimized or dismissed. You don't think like that, they'll say, as if it's that easy, but your fear deserves reverence, not reduction. Share it only with those who will honor it. Fifth, never share the full details of family conflicts. I know this is tempting. You've been through decades of family drama, betrayals, estrangements, and sometimes it aches and you want to let it out. But airing those wounds to outsiders risks not only misunderstanding, it risks fueling gossip and reactivating pain. There's strength in silence. There's dignity in saying, some things are just between us. And finally, perhaps most importantly, do not share your longings for the past with people who only look to the future. There's a loneliness that comes when you speak of old love, old songs, old streets, and the person listening only shrugs. It's not their fault necessarily, they just don't understand. But you must find those rare souls who know the sacredness of memory, who won't roll their eyes when you speak of 1965, as if it were yesterday, Nostalgia is a wound and a balm. Don't let it be mocked by those too young or too shallow to see its weight. You see, the power in aging doesn't come from broadcasting your history. It comes from owning it, quietly, with pride, with grace, with discernment. The more you withhold, the more mystery you preserve, and in mystery, there is power. You are not obligated to explain your journey to anyone who hasn't walked beside you. There's a beautiful paradox here. When you protect your inner life, when you stop handing out pieces of yourself, like free samples, your world doesn't shrink. It deepens. You begin to notice the people who truly listen. You discover the rare conversations that feel like sacred rituals. And in guarding your soul, you begin to heal. So if you're over 70, let this be your new rule. You don't have to share everything to be understood. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not anymore. You've earned the right to keep your story close to your chest. You've earned the right to walk away from conversations that don't honor you. You've earned the right to be whole, quiet, and free. And if you're listening to this and you're younger, perhaps caring for someone older, take this to heart. Don't demand full access to someone's soul just because they're old. Age does not make a person less human, less private, or less sacred. Let them keep their silences. Let them keep their mysteries. And if they choose to share, listen like it's holy, because it is. Now I want you to think about one thing you've been sharing too freely, one part of yourself that's been bruised by exposure. And I want you to reclaim it. Guard it. Make it sacred again. You are not a museum on display. You are a fortress. And inside that fortress is a life that mattered. If this spoke to you, if something in your heart stirred while listening, I invite you to reflect more deeply. Take a walk alone. Write a letter to yourself, and just maybe share this video with someone who needs to hear it too. Because at 70, the goal is no longer to be seen by everyone. It's to be understood by a few and to be at peace with yourself. That's where true freedom begins.